Welcome back. This is part 2 of Brian Hancock's interview with Megan O'Keefe Schlesinger. Enjoy.
Welcome to One Civil Affairs Podcast. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Brian Hancock, and I will be your host for this session. Today we have with us Jedi Knight Major Megan O'Keefe Schlesinger, an information advantage practitioner. She has served in the Nevada National Guard, the Pacific, Europe, and the Middle East in various capacities, from the Army Medical Department to Civil Affairs Planner and Leader with Special Operations. Megan, can you talk a little bit about your time in the National Guard, some of the things you got to do there, and maybe the similarities with the Federal Disc Commission?
Sure. So when I was in college, I had the opportunity to go through the simultaneous membership program. So that facilitated my ability to both be a guardsman and progress through ROTC. And so it provided me exposure to how the National Guard functions. You know, it is quite different than active duty. You have a very cohesive team, typically, who spend their entire career in the same state. And the unique opportunities that the Guard has tend to be more focused on disaster relief and or the needs of their governor. And that may apply to Homeland Security, Homeland Defense, or defense support to civil authorities, which tend to uniquely be a National Guard mission set, which makes our guardsmen and women quite skilled when we talk about stability operations, security operations.
Yes, surprisingly skilled. I've met a number of them. Yeah.
Right. And the opportunity when you're at the Command General Staff College is to take some electives. And one of the electives that I was able to take when I was a student in ILE was called DISCA Level 2. So you have the opportunity to study what would it take to defend a large city, or perhaps if a major disaster happened, what is the relationship, especially with things like posse comitatus? The National Guard will come to support the needs of that local community when that community's resources and capabilities have become overwhelmed, because what you learn in DISCA Level 2 is the military is never the first option. It should be the last option, deliberately, because especially in the United States, we have very robust institutions, quite capable emergency medical response, things like that, to where when you're calling in the National Guard, it's really because there may be unique resources that are needed. C-130 aircraft under the Air Guard, or
Rotary wing
aircraft. When it comes to wildland fire, or Operation Lone Star on the border, where you have state resources are potentially not sufficient for whatever the mission of the governor might be. And then, or when you're involved in any kind of disaster relief with FEMA, there may be relationships between neighboring states where another state's resources are needed for a state that may not have the same capability. There may be sharing agreements regionally across the United States. So you get to really explore the role that DISCA plays, especially for those who ever serve on Army North or NORTHCOM staff. Understanding the Homeland Security law and policies become very important because there are limits on what the military can do. But the great value of understanding DISCA, especially for civil affairs officers, it's sort of an opportunity to mature our understanding of what we are all taught about, like PMECAs. So when I can understand my community and when I can understand my state, it helps me to appreciate when I go overseas that community and maybe its differences or its strengths, and then the role that its military plays in its resiliency, its ability to respond to disaster, and then the role that its military plays in the strength, security, and stability of that local community.
Yeah.
So the value that the National Guard brings, especially to things like the state partnership program, I think is in many ways anchored in 3-28 about DISCA operations. And it's just a fun place that a warfighter doesn't necessarily give you the opportunity to deep dive into.
Right.
So, yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned the state partnership program too. I suspect a lot of folks, when they think about the National Guard, think about largely operations within that state. But through the state partner program, pretty much every major country in Europe has a stateside National Guard partner, and they conduct joint operations and training at varying degrees of sophistication. So that small National Guard unit in Kansas may be the definitive expert within DoD of what Bulgaria looks like and their armed forces and their operating environment. Not something that you would necessarily intuit from Compo 2, but that is absolutely there. And it makes a huge difference for us over here in Europe. One of the reasons that the Ukrainians were so well prepared is because they had such a strong partnership with their National Guard back here in the United States. And it made a huge difference for them. Let's hop back to the SAMS topic for a minute. Looking at the contemporary operating environment, modern warfare is absolutely more complex than it's ever been, not just with the number of domains, the number of dimensions, the number of environments. You mentioned earlier spectrum. Spectrum by doctrine is classified as an environment, a subset of the electromagnetic environment. And we still have to worry about that, which is ubiquitous like air for us at this time. You have nations executing operations at all phases of conflict in strategic integrated ways, particularly with countries like China. It's a tough operating environment for us to understand, for us to assess, for us to inject carefully thought out interventions that benefit everyone involved. And navigating that complexity can be very hard for anyone, I think particularly for some folks. But as we look at that, one of the ways that complexity manifests in a strategic challenge is in our ability to convert our well-proven capability to achieve tactical success on battlefields, but converting that to achieving strategic objectives so that there's some stability, so that we don't have to keep coming back to that location, so that they don't threaten their neighbors. That has been somewhat elusive. And if SAMS graduates are supposed to help fill that role in the Army to navigate that complexity, based on your experience, do you see that happening? Are they having that level of impact as I think the program originally intended? And why or why not?
So that's a lot. And to peel it back a little bit and kind of anchor on your comment about complexity. So I believe that Fort Leavenworth is truly the think tank of the Army. Students who are either part of the Art of War's Scholar Program or the MMAS programs, the Information Advantage Scholars Program, or those who come out of the School of Advanced Military Studies, all of those students are charged with the responsibility of drafting either a thesis or a shorter version of a thesis called a monograph. And that forces the students over the course of a year, or for some too, because those who go to ILE and get an MMAS and then continue to get an additional master's degree at SAMS, they're really honing in those research skills. And so the think tank of Fort Leavenworth has an incredible library with gifted researchers to help students improve their own ability to think critically and dive into information that in your day-to-day job you just don't have time to do. But as a student, that is your responsibility to help solve the hard problems of the military. You know, I encourage your listeners to go on to the Carl Library website and really dive into decades of monographs from students who are brilliant in their own regard. And many of these monographs will trickle into doctrine, and students might develop their own theories that we will then test and eventually turn into practice. So, you know, we talk about in SAMS history, theory, doctrine, practice. And so it is a cyclical thing where the students have a historian on staff. Every month, they'll go through a different block of instruction throughout a historical era of warfare. And then they'll have a full-bird colonel who will help guide the discussion. But it's really a Socratic method of peer-to-peer education guided by true experts in either military history or emerging field like mine being information operations. And then with both American instructors and international instructors. So going into your comment about critical thinking, one of the things that I loved about SAMS, we had different blocks. And so those blocks included design methodology, futures, looking at systems, and then diving into history as we discover Okay, how do we think about this in a historical perspective? Or how do we think about a problem in a futures perspective? And then how do we look at it systematically? And then ultimately, how do we develop the framework for a problem? And then, as you can hear, you could take a problem in many different directions. Like problem X could have a preposterous outcome or a very muted outcome. And how do we guide our decision making to enable an end state that is desirable?
I love how you mentioned that, because I think we focus on the kind of the first order effects oftentimes, certainly in our collateral damage estimates and other things we do when we're executing military operations. But it's often those second and third order effects that are tied to the strategic outcomes that we need to be able to manage and to tackle. So you're getting some reps and sets and kind of taking it beyond just the tactical level to start tying that up and fitting it back to Diamond Kamisi beyond just the initial battlefield.
Well, certainly. And then ultimately, it is creating a framework that helps a commander visualize, understand, and direct action. And then the staff continue to assess. So, God, we talk about these buzzwords in the Army, but they are truly important. If our commanders don't understand the problem that we're presenting to them, then we have to reframe in a way that helps to make sure that we're having the same conversation. Are we in the same story here? But then ensuring that our commanders, who are ultimately the decision makers in organizations, can absorb the information that we're presenting in a way that helps him or her to make the best decisions. So there's a lot of complementary aspects between the field of IO and the education that you get to become a better planner.
I want to follow up for 1 second on what you're talking about, problem framing.
Sure.
And when we look at some of our areas where our strategy didn't work out, taking a look at the ultimate outcome in the Iraq conflicts, a lot of studies by Rand and others say, hey, look, we tried to solve the wrong problem. So the critical breakdown was very early in the process. Well, doctrinally, that's at the mission analysis phase for the Army. But the Marine Corps recognizes that problems are so critical to get right. Their mission analysis is called problem framing, to be able to get specifically after that, because everything else follows. We're very problem fixing focused in the military. And if we get the problem statement wrong, then we're applying the wrong ends, ways, and means to deliver the strategic effects that we need. So what I'm hearing is that the SAMs and the cohorts and some of the programs there are actually critical thinking kind of incubators to help get after not just a superficial categorization based upon, say, a political objective, but what does that really mean? And then how we would really go about being able
it's kind of like building a house. If you're building a house in the wrong environment, you may forget to have the insulated windows in an extremely cold environment. Or maybe you forgot that you built it on a slab in a place prone to earthquakes. Like that may not be the right analogy, but
it's a great analogy. Monty Python, they built the castle in the swamp and it sunk 3 times. Great analogy.
So problem framing, it's a useful tool because we really shouldn't start the military decision-making process unless we understand the problem that we're trying to solve and acknowledging, is it a military problem to solve? It's not always, like I said earlier with DISCA.
Right.
Sometimes the military is the last resort. And so it is how we bound what we are trying to accomplish with the means that we have available to us. And if we apply the wrong construction material to a beautiful home, it doesn't matter how pretty it was. If it falls apart in 2 years,
right,
we made a bad investment, right? So we want to be very careful to ensure that we're aware of our operating environment and trying to apply critical thinking to assess the true problems, to inform our civilian leaders that the military decision-making process that ultimately will come out of Army design methodology develops options that are best suited for the situation at hand. And sometimes that can be frustrating. We often don't appreciate the phrase tactical patience, but sometimes tactical patience is necessary to give our planners time to think. And we don't always have the luxury of time. Certainly like when we talk about natural disasters, we don't always have the luxury of time. Sometimes you just have to go with your best military advice, with what you know at hand. That's right. And history can be a helpful playbook, but certainly must take into account the current operating environment. And so the value that you get from SAMS is really just, I think, being a better planner, better officer, better leader, and a better individual. The conversations both in and out of the office at SAMS are, you could call it fellowship, you could call it friendship, you could call it just lifelong mentorship.
And hopefully you have a good playbook, professional network building.
Right. That we have to acknowledge that we don't all have the answers. There's not always a perfect solution. And something that SAMS teaches you, it's okay to ask for help. And not only does that speed up our decision making, but it leverages ideas and thought processes that may be internal to our staffs we didn't have before.
And it raises the N, so we have more samples for better statistic validity of our conclusions.
Yeah.
Now, if somebody doesn't want to challenge SAMS, but still wants to have this type of rigorous broadening opportunity, what are some of the other options that are available?
So each service has a equivalent to SAMS. However, the Army's is the largest. And then you have more joint-oriented venues like the Joint Special Operations University. And then you have Naval Postgraduate School down in Monterey, California, where there's an information warfare studies program. And across these venues, the value that you get is different ways of thinking, slightly different venues, slightly different outcomes, where much like you have ROTC, OCS, West Point, when you think about the collective value that the Navy brings or that the Army brings, and then when you bring that all together, it's quite brilliant. So if either you're not in the Army and you're listening to this, or you're in the Army and you're looking to grow within your sister service skill set, like I encourage students to go online and look at the application windows. Certainly, they're all going to have their own unique requirements, some more challenging than others. And most of them will have some sort of staff ride that you get to go on. I'm pretty jealous. I believe the Marine Corps gets to go to Europe for a couple days for their staff ride.
They do.
And the School of Advanced Military Studies takes their students on a staff ride to Mississippi to study the Battle of Vicksburg, which is a wonderful opportunity to appreciate the complexities of joint warfare in the Civil War, the unique geography of the southern states of the United States, and the role that both the Navy and the Army played in the Vicksburg campaign. So it's not Europe, but it's still a great cultural perspective of looking at warfare on the homeland.
That's outstanding. And you don't have to go to Europe or Asia to learn valuable lessons. They're all over the world. And every one of these sites has something to teach us if we are open-minded and approach it with some humility. So let me ask you, what advice could you give to folks?
So read broadly. You don't have to necessarily go to a year-long school to become a true gifted officer, gifted professional. And if you're not looking at Audible, or you're not checking books out from the library, or you're not having some debates with friends and colleagues, I got to say, you might not be the right fit for SAMS, because I tell you, the Book a Day Club is real. And the importance behind being a self-motivated, self-driven individual when it comes to learning is sometimes the folks to our left and right are leaning on us to think about things and to provide input. And if you're not reading the news and you're not diversifying your thought processes through reading widely and deeply, you may miss some details. And so I love looking at books, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. Military history is always obviously important, but then beyond just military history, there's great courses series out there where you can look at fun topics like the history of spycraft, right? Or the ethics of military warfare, or the August Cole and Peter Singer series like Ghost Fleet or Burn-In or Like War are really good starting points to think through IO stuff. Those authors have had the effect of taking emerging technology and applying it to fiction in a way that helps to tell the story of, talked about earlier, possible futures. And so why do I say read a lot? Well, to be a good professional, we also have to give back, kind of like today with you. Right. And so whether you're passionate about writing articles for professional outlets or contributing to leadership development programs in your own home unit, looking at what other folks are reading, thinking about, and writing on can help really deepen the intellectual value of your staff. No one wants a boring staff. I love when I can walk into the office and have a healthy debate about something. It keeps us on our toes. It keeps us young.
That's one of the things I love about the Marine Corps. They have a fantastic culture of intellectual exchange where you could take any position, but you have to bring the facts to back that up. So everyone walks away learning something from that exchange, whatever point of view you have. So I appreciate the value of an opportunity like that.
But here's the thing too. Army libraries, they're free. And you can check out a book. Yeah, you can check out a book from across the nation. Army and DoD library program is pretty phenomenal because turns out military appreciates education.
Outstanding. Relative to the value it brings, not only for your career, but just for your personal life enrichment.
Sure.
Pennies on the dollar. It's the return on investment is amazing. Thank you for all of those recommendations for the audience. Really appreciate you coming on the show today.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate your time today and the opportunity to be on your show.
Thanks for listening. If you get a chance, please like and subscribe and rate the show on your favorite podcast platform. Also, if you're interested in coming on the show or hosting an episode, email us at capodcasting@gmail.com. I'll have the email and CA Association website in the show notes. And now, most importantly, to those currently out in the field, working with a partner nation's people or leadership to forward U.S. relations, thank you all for what you're doing. This is Jack, your host. Stay tuned for more great episodes. 1CA Podcast.